Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Martin Edralin, a filmmaker whose short films Hole and Emma announced him as a storyteller with an especially compassionate eye. His debut feature, Islands, confirms it. A drama starring Rogelio Balagtas as Joshua, a middle-aged man who's spent his entire life living with his parents, never developing any relations of his own, whose world is rocked when a cousin comes to visit from overseas, making Joshua suddenly aware of all the things he's missed out on. Balagtas won a special jury prize for his exceptional performance when Islands premiered at South by Southwest last spring, and now the film is getting a theatrical run in Toronto at the TIFF Bell Lightbox tonight, Tuesday, April 12th, through Thursday, April 14th. It's very good, and you should see it. Martin chose Secret Sunshine, Lee Chang-dong's 2007 drama about another lost soul, Shinai, played by Jeon Do-young. Recently widowed, Shinai has moved with her young son Jun to her husband's birthplace, the small town of Muryang, to open a piano school and build a house. But things don't go as planned, and before long, Shinai is carrying the weight of another even more horrible loss, taking refuge in Christianity while rebuffing the attempts at friendship offered by a local mechanic named Mr. Kim, played by Maximum Affability by Song Kang-ho. The film won Jeon the prize for Best Actress at Cannes and prefigures the intense, empathetic focus Lee would bring to his subsequent features Poetry and Burning, and it affected Martin very powerfully. He'll tell you how. This is Someone Else's Movie.
It's a movie I think a lot about, and it's a film that I feel like nobody has seen. Like, people I talk to, whenever I bring it up, like Albert Shin, who you probably know, a Toronto filmmaker, he's the only other person that when I brought it up, he's like, yeah, of course I've seen it. But nobody else knows this movie. I don't know why. I actually stumbled on it. I was at the library years ago, and that's where I would take out DVDs, and I saw this cover. It looked cool. It was Criterion. I had no expectations, and I was blown away. I actually just read the other day that it was the first Korean Criterion film.
Yeah, it probably was. That would have been 2011.
Yeah.
I can't think of another. Their Asian representation or Asian cinema representation has been thin, or had been. I mean, they had, I remember I had a Laserdisc of the Makioka sisters. That's probably the only, well, and the Kurosawas, of course, they've always had a good line on that through Janice. But yeah, Korea and China have been underrepresented considerably over the years. And they've started to make that better. I think in some cases too, it's just a question of access. They couldn't do Burning because Welgo had the rights, and Welgo just doesn't do a partnership with Criterion ever.
Yeah.
And the other thing about Secret Sunshine too, is it was weirdly underrepresented in North America, right? It was at Cannes in 2007, but it didn't open in the States until 2010.
Yeah.
Having not seen it for about 10 years, I went back and rewatched it last night, and it's, especially in the wake of Burning, it's remarkable just how specific Lee's cinema is, how it really feels completely of a piece with Burning and with Poetry. They're all about people dealing with the inexplicable in their lives, just on different levels. But to come to this cold and not, that must have been incredible.
It was so moving. I mean, the lead actress, I mean, both of the leads, their performances blew me away. And what's funny is, like, what I remember most about this movie is, I mean, obviously the protagonist's tragedy, like, it's so tragic. But then also the Song Kang-ho's character is just so funny. And then when I also rewatched it a few days ago, and I forget about the religious commentary. I mean, Lee Chang-dong says that he wasn't really trying to comment on religion, but I would argue that I think it does make a commentary on religion. But it's the balance of the comedy and the tragedy that I appreciate so much in this movie. And I can't recall another movie that does the extremes so well in one piece.
Yeah, I had not remembered quite how balanced it is. My core memory of it is just the sheer devastation, the way that you're sort of trapped with someone going through what she thinks is the worst time of her life, and then discovering that she had no idea what was coming. And
Mm.
we can talk about the plot if you want to. I mean, it's a 15-year-old movie at this point, but um, it's remarkable just how light some of it is. That the song is, he's just so, he's so awkward and present and happy and chipper, and all of his function within the film as a character. Mr. Kim is there to make us feel better the same way he's there to make her feel better. We just figure it out sooner. Shania is broken, just flailing and desperate for anything to make her life make sense. And she goes from skeptic to believer and back to skeptic again. And you're just watching someone be hollowed out with like a grapefruit spoon for 2.5 hours. It's excruciating, and it would be unbearable. And yeah, Lee says this is in one of the interviews on the Blu-ray. If it wasn't for Mr. Kim, you would not be able to watch this movie. And then I realized watching it last night, it's almost a two-hander. Like I remember, I so vividly remember Jeon Do-yeon, and I had, even when his name showed up in the credits, it's like, oh, that's right, he's in this. And then suddenly just to see how much space he occupies and how much work he's putting in to make it okay to see hope when there isn't any in the film. And the bleakness of the vision of the movie would just be, it would be unwatchable without him.
Yeah, I think so. I'm also a fan of Michael Haneke, so it's kind of like this movie without Mr. Kim. But yeah, like Mr. Kim, actually anytime I see him, and you see him in Bong Joon-ho's movies, and he's always Mr. Kim to me because of Secret Sunshine.
Okay. I think I first noticed him really in I think The Host. I'd seen him around. I mean, I know I'd seen him in other things, but it wasn't until The Host that he sort of came into focus as someone who, as it turns out, is completely unlike him. Unlike the actor at all. He's just slow and kind of slow and sad, which are not things that I would put on that actor at all. He's right. Such a lively presence. And here as well, where he's just there's little throwaway moments where in the garage where he's just sort of casually joining in on the sexual harassment of their coworker, and it's good natured from him in some strange way. Like he's not trying to break it up or deflect it. He's making it a little less awful. It's though his presence is there to just buoy up the space.
Yeah, and you almost feel like he's someone that just, he wants to be liked, and so he kind of just goes with whatever everybody else is doing. And and he's, as you said, he's just like really sweet and innocent, and you kind of just accept it, and that he's a guy that can't really stand up for himself. I mean, he stands up for himself once in the movie.
He's better. Yeah. He's better when he's standing up for other people. I think like that's his function, is to just be helpful. And I've known people like that. And there's always a little air of, it's not sadness exactly, but it feels like they're doing it because there's something missing, because they're trying just a little too hard to connect. It's not a bad thing. It's the best possible impulse in the world is, I think, to connect to another human being, but he finds that glimmer of awkwardness, the sense that he knows it's not working 100% of the time. And he just doesn't know how to correct that. Right. He has the structuring absence of social confidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And given that the character is paired with someone who is a black hole emotionally, like she doesn't draw him in, which I find really fascinating. He's pulled to her, but she doesn't want him near her, because by that point in the film, she's just decided that she needs to do everything herself. And then that includes carrying this horrific weight of suffering. Yeah.
Well, and what Lee does so well is like, we also see that she does need him.
Yeah.
We eventually see that he's all that she has, really.
Yeah. No, Shania is alone before the movie starts.
Yeah.
Even though she's got a son, we meet her alone in the car. We meet her alone outside the car, rather isolated, calling people. And she has an anchor, but as soon as that is taken away from her, there's nothing. She has, we find out that she up and left her family to get married. She hasn't had much contact with them. Her brother doesn't seem to respect her for anything, like her choices or the life she's built for herself. And she seems like a fairly decent person from everything we see. So whatever's going on in the family, I love that it's never resolved. It's just simply there, because that's how you meet people. They're in the middle of their lives. They don't come with a backstory that they immediately relate to everybody. And the fact that she's so closed off after John goes missing, even before she is in the worst pain, even before she reaches her absolute nadir, I never know how to pronounce that word. She is refusing all entreaties of help, of companionship. She's offering advice where it's not wanted. She's like, her social skills aren't great either, but she's fine with her son. She's good as a mother. It's all she has, right? That's her identity. Yeah. She's going to mentor children as a piano teacher. And then when those things are taken away from her, she ceases to function. And we're only an hour into this film. I glanced at the running time this time, and it's exactly halfway through when she goes to the revival meeting. It's 1 hour, 11 minutes into 2 hours and 22. And it's the point where things in any conventional story would get better, but they don't.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of things I appreciate about this movie like that it's weird because I feel like overall the structure of the storytelling is traditional. Like it's a 3-act film, but like you don't know what to expect. Like I remember when I first watched it, and even watching it again, I thought it feels like a murder mystery. But then it's like, oh, right away they find June, and then you're like, where's this going now?
Yeah,
like crime solved.
His body is discovered, the killer is revealed, and sentenced and imprisoned.
Yeah,
within no time at all, really. I mean, I think he goes missing in maybe 45 minutes and is found 10 minutes later. And it just leapfrogs over all the things that you would expect from this story. But I think it works brilliantly because we're trapped with someone whose life is just shattered. And so it doesn't matter how much time goes by. She's no better. She's not recovering and she's not processing. And her attempt to forgive is short-circuited, and that is for all of the acting that goes on in the film and for all of the incredible singular performance that we get from Jun Do-yeon. That scene, I think, is like you can watch her deflate and get angry, and all of it is in her. Like it's in her eyes and her jaw, and it's so horrible. And it's the only time that there's an extreme emotional moment that we see her head on. For everything else, not everything else, but for almost everything else, all the major moments, she's got her back to us or she's crouching away from us, and it's as though the camera can't bear to look at her. At the very end, there's the close-up on her face, of course, that sells everything. But I was really struck by just how willing Lee Chang-dong has always been to hold on his actors and let them do the sell. Like it's not, the technique is important, but the script has got us here, and they just have to carry this 90 seconds. And every single time in every movie he makes, it comes through.
Yeah. And that, so you're talking about the prison scene, right?
Yeah.
Both times watching it, like it really, really gets to me. And, I think we all know that moment when you're trying to be the bigger person, and when it backfires like that, like, I don't know, the performance, I mean, just the confrontation right at that prison window, it was like so understated but so powerful. Like I felt, I probably looked like her as it was happening.
Yeah. Well, and it's a person as well. The problem is that, her child's killer is using the same language she's been using about accepting God into his heart and finding forgiveness and absolution and being born again. And we just watched her go through all of this, and it sends her spiraling, as it should, of course, but we're allowed to sort of breathe it in and see how it can be interpreted as I mean, it reads to me as hypocrisy. It just feels to me like this guy's found a dodge that works for him. The same way he could rationalize whatever it was that he did that ended up with a dead child. Like this is the way he gets through this. And maybe it's the mirroring, the fact that is how she's getting through this horrible tragedy as well.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's the larger cynicism that she displayed earlier coming back and having it thrown in her face about how, I don't believe in anything I can't see. And why would I invest in a God that allows for this level of suffering? Well, she just did. That didn't work. This is happening. And now she has to rationalize that. And it's a fundamentally irrational proposition.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that any of this is someone else's will, that there's a purpose. And yet somehow the movie allows us to hope that maybe there is redemption, that maybe something can be solved. You're watching someone just spiral down to the lowest possible place naturally, because all films are empathy. We want to see her get out.
Yeah. Yeah. What were you thinking the first time you saw it when she decided that she wanted to forgive him? Did it sound like, wow, this woman is doing a great thing, or were you shaking your head?
It felt like something that a new convert would do. Like someone who's embracing all the tenets would want to do the things that everyone else says you're supposed to do.
Right.
I wasn't sure if I believed it, but in as much as she was going through the motions earlier of just living in the world after all of this was taken away from her, and I could see how someone desperate for meaning would want to do everything to make that happen.
Right.
And then when he beats her to it effectively, you can see it all fall away. Like you can just see how she gives up. And then it's funny. It wasn't until this viewing that I understood what that moment where she's looking upward and just saying, "Can you see?" It didn't really hit me until this time that she was talking to God, or at least trying to, that she still believes in some strange way, but now she's acting in defiance and exercising her free will the way her son's murderer did. That, you can believe in God and still do terrible things. And that examination of what place morality has in a world with God where awful things happen, that seems to be the point of the film now to me. It's like, what decisions do you make when you are still convinced you're being judged?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, I mean, even when you brought up what religion does for this, the killer, on this watching, I also kind of saw it through the critique that Lee Chang-dong says he's not making about religion, but I was also curious, is this part of that? And I'm so curious to know if he really wasn't trying to make a commentary, or he just doesn't want to have that out there and get attacked for it.
I wonder, right? I mean, religion doesn't factor too heavily into his other films.
No.
And Burning seems to come down pretty hard on the side of the morality that works for you is the morality in the moment. But only if the killer in Burning is the killer. And if he's not, then it's a film about someone who has absolutely invested himself in the wrong faith, and he's acting on faith rather than proof and conviction. And the ambiguity in that is incredible. The ambiguity here is what happens next, not is something right or wrong. And you mentioned Haneke. I thought of Von Trier too. I thought of Breaking the Waves specifically.
Right. Yeah.
We're watching the scourging of a future saint, but she's not a saint yet. And she's just going through the trials, and it's just so painful. Meanwhile, here's Mr. Kim, who may actually be a saint, just doing everything. Even before he starts going to church, he's acting more or less in a Christian fashion. He's offering help. He's connecting people. He's committing he's performing fellowship and doing all the things that are pretty New Testament-y without ever putting a name to it. And then even once he starts going to church and participating in services, he kind of laughs it off and tells someone at the very end, it's like, I miss it if I don't go. But I think he doesn't need the church. He is the church in a weird way. He's doing all the things that the Christians purport or profess to be doing.
Yeah, I haven't thought of it in that way. No, that's a great observation.
It's just a strange parallel, isn't it? It's sort of floating there. Certainly the film never makes it concrete. Although at the very end, the thing he does is hold up a mirror to someone who desperately needs to see herself. And that's sort of God. I mean, I don't know.
Well, and also, opening the film with the sky and ending on the dirt. I mean, to me, it's very obvious what that says.
Yeah.
Especially on the second viewing.
Yeah. And the shaft of sunlight playing where it plays.
Mm-hmm.
It's the bells at the end of Breaking the Waves. I think that's the other reason I kept thinking of it. It's that that's as concrete a statement as you can make in that film. And here it's just quietly, beautifully coming back to something that one of the least helpful people said ultimately, but turns out that person seems to have been right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's beautiful. I mean, it really, so many movies end on quiet contemplation and it's fine. And this one is, nothing happens, but it's absolutely shattering. It's so beautiful that you want to cry.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you come across anything about Lee Chang-dong's leads hating him?
No, just generally speaking, or in this film?
Yeah, actually, everyone except I don't know her name, but the lead in Poetry, he said they had a very sweet relationship, but he admits that all of his leads, especially Jun Do-yoon, like absolutely hated him. And he used that, he would tell her, "You're angry at God, but look at me," and direct the anger you feel at me. And he specifically talks about the moment after the prison where she just looks deflated, that he told her, "Look at me." And that's where it came from.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
It's kind of horrible. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a featurette on the Blu-ray where Song Kang-ho and Lee Chang-dong are just hanging out and having a great time. And then it immediately rolls into an entire, it's this little 6-minute video shot. It's just interviews with Jeon and Sung. And she says there was a day where they had to shut production down because she couldn't figure it out. She couldn't get the character. And then immediately they show footage of that. And Lee Chang-dong seems to be very supportive. He said, "We're not getting it. This is a bad day. Let's just stop and pick it up tomorrow." But there's the sense that he's supporting her. And I didn't get any of that energy. That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, when I read it, I was a little bit surprised. And it doesn't sound like, the kind of thing that you hear about Lars von Trier and what he puts his actors through. So I'm just curious what the problems actually were. But I haven't come across anything more.
Yeah. Maybe
it's him himself saying it.
Yeah. So maybe it's just a deliberate standoffishness to get the actors to the place they need. That seems awful too. I mean, you're a filmmaker. You don't do that to people.
I would never, no.
Maybe it's an old school thing. I mean, he started late to directing, right? He was a novelist before he started making movies.
That's right.
And I wonder if that mentality where, as a novelist, you can torture your characters pretty much without any consequence, right? I mean, you're just putting people through the ringer and then you just type them. You're not actually interacting with flesh and blood people. That maybe that extends to the way he directs. I don't know. That's fascinating. I'd love to talk to Stephen Yeun about it because he'd have a completely different perspective.
It might be different. I mean, he was already a star at that point. Mm-hmm. So it's probably a different relationship.
True. Yeah. I'm just thinking coming from mostly American productions into Korean cinema would be like a bit of a shift, a tonal shift. I mean, I know that directors are revered in Korean cinema to the point where they're like Director Bong and Director Lee, and that's just how they're honorifics rather than job titles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. It's the same in the Philippines too.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to link this to Islands without going directly into you make films about despairing people, but it is like there is a sort of a resonance to Islands in that it's a movie about someone who is at the end of his rope but doesn't understand it, and then discovers that there's more rope, but it's not any better. did Secret Sunshine factor in? Were you thinking about it? Was it just lonely desperation as a narrative isn't exclusive to that film, but it is sort of strangely knotted up in family and isolation and loneliness and longing in a way that seems to ring with me.
Yeah, it's a theme that has appeared in all of my narrative work, like my two shorts before this too, and it was not deliberate. I think I've only realized this with the making of Islands, that I guess loneliness is my jam. and you know, my first short film Whole was about a middle-aged actor or character who is also, you know, longing for love or physical interaction. I wasn't thinking about Secret Sunshine, but having rewatched it, you know, there are some interesting parallels. Like, I know it did come to mind in, like, you know, I said earlier, the balance of tragedy and comedy. And as I was developing Islands, at some point, it didn't always have these, you know, funnier, lighter moments. And I started to try to be playful with it, but I wasn't really thinking about trying to balance the tragedy. It just, for whatever reason, it felt like the right thing to do.
I can sort of see that. Yeah. I mean, just without the lighter human stuff, not even human stuff, even the despair is human stuff, but without the lightness, it really is just dark. There's no reason for the audience to invest if it's just empty misery, which is actually one of the things I have against the Haneke film that parallels the closest to this, which is The Piano Teacher, to me, to Secret Sunshine, because they're both about self-destructive characters who don't think they're self-destructive. But
right.
Haneke's is just pushing Isabelle Huppert to go even further, whereas this is about a character who is slowly being brought forward into the light, as opposed to just this downward slope that has no off ramp and also no reason to stay on it for the audience. I remember thinking, well, I know exactly what's going to happen next. Someone else is going to be unhappy, and then someone else again. And Secret Sunshine just doesn't do that. It's the same person, and it's the world around her that's offering her chances to break free, and we have to see that she doesn't see them. So the movie is smart enough. The emotional intelligence is there. And in Islands, the levity comes from places that it organically finds within that world, right? There's no friendly stranger who shows up with a jukebox or a karaoke machine to make everybody happy for 5 minutes and then leave. Everything that happens in Islands happens because of the trajectory the character is on, similar to Secret Sunshine. It's all about seeing opportunity or learning how to see opportunity, I would say.
Right. Yeah. I think so. And I guess, I mean, there are similarities, I think, with Song and Joshua, in that they're both these sort of like innocent, lonely men, but whereas in Secret Sunshine, he's a little bit of a fool, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think we laugh at him a lot more than we would Joshua in Islands, where you kind of, you know, I didn't want him to be like I didn't want it to be like the sad middle-aged guy kind of story. It's just sort of someone that's never had the opportunity to grow or mature. And it's not because of, you know, maybe it's his shyness a little bit, but it's also just something cultural. When you live with your parents, if you're in a culture where you don't leave the house until you're married, and your mother does everything for you and won't even let you do these things because she wants to do it for you. So like, it's not his fault that he's the way that he is.
Yeah. Joshua's mom, she was the locus of the family, right? She made everything possible. And the moment she's gone, you have two people who've never really thought about who they are to each other without her. And yeah, his shyness is absolutely part of it, but you're right. He's never been encouraged to get past it. He's never had to. And so I guess the difference between Joshua and Mr. Kim is that Joshua is the centerpiece. He's the lead of your film. So his pathos is much more profound to us because we're following, he's almost in every shot. We follow this character constantly, and we see how desperately he wants to not be who he is, which is so tragic. But also gives us a rooting interest, right? Like, we want him to not be who he is. We want him to be himself, but happier, which is the same thing that's going on with Shinai in Secret Sunshine, is that we see the potential that she's refusing to embrace. Joshua maybe doesn't have quite so much going for him at the outset. He doesn't have the resources that she has. He doesn't have the friend group, I guess you'd say, that she eventually builds, but he's capable of all of it. And he just has to realize he wants it badly enough, right? Like, it's a hero's journey in a really strange way, and that we just want him to leave the house.
Yeah. Well, I have a funny question for you.
Sure.
With both of the two characters in both films, how did you feel about both relationships? So, like, for Islands, were you thinking, Joshua, what are you doing? You're related, or were you like, maybe why not? and the same in the other movie. Like, did you think, Mr. Kim, stop, or maybe you guys can grow together?
I will say, the first time I was on her side in Secret Sunshine, it's like, she doesn't want you, leave her alone. And it's the scene where he forces himself into the cab and she immediately kicks him out.
Yeah.
Which is, again, halfway through the film. And it's that absolute refusal to accept his help, but also the film's understanding that he's not offering it the way she needs it, right? Like the classic empathy, the classic rule of empathy is the thing that we've all sort of learned recently. In a crisis, when someone displays themselves to be needing help, it's not up to us on the outside to impose our idea of help. You're supposed to say, how can I help? What do you need? What can I do? Not, this is what I'm going to do for you. And Mr. Kim isn't there yet. He really only wants to do what he wants to do, which is be with this woman and help her. And be with this woman comes first. And it isn't until the second thing happens, and it's after the prison, where he starts listening to her and trying to help her the way she wants to be helped, that things start to make sense for the two of them as a couple. I caught that much more easily the second time through, because Song Kang-ho is so good at showing us that change, that little pivot he tries to assault the man who murdered her son because that's what he should do in the moment, but she doesn't want that. She can't even process it. It makes her feel even more inadequate, right? She actually says so later, but he doesn't hear it. He doesn't see it. He can't read her, but he wants to be with her. So he just keeps following her around. And it isn't until he starts listening that he's better for it, and their relationship has any kind of chance. And it's when he stops touching her, I think. It's when he stops pushing her and steering her, and starts taking her actual wants and needs into consideration, to the point where when he shows up at the end to hold the mirror for her, it's passive, it's silent. He's not trying to cut her hair for her. He's just there with her. And the Joshua situation in Islands, I think it's okay that they're cousins because they're both kind of into it.
Right.
I mean, it feels like, I have to admit, part of it was my brain going, well, is this a cultural thing? Should I stay out of it and just let it develop? I don't know. And then I realized that's sort of condescending on my end. And it's just about sympathy, right? Not just empathy, but actual sympathy between the two of them, that they understand each other better than anyone else can. And if they want to be together, there's really nothing wrong with it. It didn't feel, weird and incestuous and family to me, especially because they've spent so much time apart that they might as well be strangers.
Right.
But it was really more about watching someone see himself in someone else and be understood, which is, it's both romantic and platonic, right? Like that moment when it happens it's just connection. And if that happens, then whatever happens after that is probably worth pursuing.
Right.
As long as it's consensual and everything is genetically above board. It is kind of weird. The cousins thing is a bit strange when you lay it out, but it also feels like it's even if it doesn't last, even if it's you know, potentially wrong. It's a way of learning about himself for Joshua, and it's not like he's taking advantage of her in doing so.
I mean, I think like when I was writing it, I kind of felt like, yeah, they don't know each other. They're practically strangers. And I think it wouldn't be crazy that two people like that would develop feelings.
Sure.
You know, maybe you would know better than to act on it, but I mean, who's to say? And there are cousins that marry.
Sure.
And I do get a lot of questions of, you know, because, you know, in Filipino culture, everyone's kind of your cousin. So it's like, are they really related? Are they first cousins or second, or like?
Well, that's what I was wondering, because the honorific uncle gets thrown around a lot too, right? So it doesn't, and auntie, it doesn't seem to be directly based on parents who were siblings, but it also feels as though if there was something wrong with it, she would say so. Like, she's far more emotionally developed than he is. And I think that was what made it okay for me not to worry about it. It was just the sense that this movie isn't playing it like the movie seems to feel that it's fine for them to connect. And she's written well enough that if there was an objection, she would voice it.
Right. Yeah.
So I just rolled with it. Tried not to be a colonizer and let the movie tell me what the movie told me.
That's great.
It's dicey potentially, right? I mean, if you do get an audience, have you had that happen? Have you had an audience really reject it when that moment comes?
No, I mean, I had more friends or peers that are like, yeah, that's kind of weird, but I don't think it really put anybody off.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned,
and maybe if it had gone further.
Yeah. Which again, I don't want to get into the ending there, or the way things are left with the characters. Yeah. I don't want to spoil it, but it is such any movie that deals with that level of emotion, that tries to be honest about how devastating it is to reach out before you know if it's going to be reciprocated, like that's going to be that's so potent as a storytelling device. And so many times I've just seen, movies with it, where it's just, the music comes up and that does the selling, and films where it really does hang on the actors, and the silence is the awkward, uncomfortable moment before you get a yes or a no. Those are some of the greatest dramatic tensions you can experience. I love that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we all know that feeling.
Yeah. But it's too personal and intimate to put on film, right? Most of the time, the last thing you want to do is show someone being that vulnerable.
Yeah.
And when it pays off, it feels like the whole world is opening up.
Mm-hmm.
If you get it right.
Right.
In life as well as in film. I mean, it's that ineffable thing that movies almost never dare to address, because filmmakers, I think, sometimes don't know that they can pull it off. Actors are afraid of looking silly. There are all these stumbling blocks set up for something like that, where you're just stripping a movie down to two people trying to figure out if they're going to be together or not. And it's weird that Secret Sunshine kind of plays in the same space when that's not what it's about at all, but it has room for it. Like, it has room for this feature-length question about whether these two people even belong together, and it leaves it unanswered, which I think is wonderful. But the entire thing is about watching Mr. Kim prove himself worthy, if that's what you're watching the movie for. But it's also about a woman who endures the worst experiences of her life and then will forever associate this man with them. Like, right. even if they get together, he'll always be a reminder of the time she lost her son and the times she tried to end her own life, and all of it. It's all tangled up. And it's, again, like, her first impulse when she gets that phone call is to go run to him and for help. She reaches to him and then never tells him.
Yeah.
Which is so powerful in its own way, that there's all this stuff going on in her life that she doesn't burden him with, even though he keeps telling her he wants to help. It's not even the focus of the film, but in retrospect, it just becomes such a clear through line that he built for those characters. I just find that absolutely amazing in the structuring of it. How do you know when you write something like this, that's what the story you're not telling will become the most important story?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, while you bring that scene up, it's one of my favorites. She's running to him for help, and he's singing away.
Oblivious karaoke. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think, to be honest, like I know those situations so well, and I've many times have expressed feelings for people where, you become good friends and you think there's something going on, and you realize, oh no, we were just friends.
Yeah.
And then when you think in hindsight, you're like, oh yeah, it becomes very obvious. And then, when you do fall in love, then and then looking back on all those other, when I've admitted feelings, you're like, oh, it's actually so easy. Like, it's very obvious when there's something happening.
Yeah. But until you have that experience, right, everything else feels fraught. And we only have the movie versions of things, or the 3-minute rock song version of thing,
Right.
to relate them to, until it actually happens. And it's really, it's hard to, well, it's like Mr. Kim, it's hard to separate what you think you should do from what you naturally want to do.
Yeah.
And when it works, it just works. It is just effortless. It's like, finding a new friend. It just keeps going. And it's so hard to explain. And it also makes you sound like an idiot because it's so hard to explain, right? Like the hardest conversations you ever have are about your own feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
But people make movies about them instead, so I don't have to.
But yeah, I don't know. Are there other movies? Like, I can't really think of any movies that are similar in, like, exploring that, that thing of when you think your relationship's developing, but it's not. I mean, there must be a lot more out there.
I'm sure there are. I don't know that you could build a movie on that alone. And I'm sure people are listening to this and screaming the titles of their favorite films,
Yeah.
which is always a danger. But yeah, it's so specific and so, I think, so despairing that I don't know that you'd even be able to sell it. Why would you want to go and see that story told if you had it happen to you, if you felt it?
Right.
Rushmore does it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one.
Although we're also supposed to be very, very conscious that it isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
It's the complete incompatibility, and then the resolution of it, which is that amazing Olivia Williams monologue. It's like, would you tell your friends you fucked me? And it's just devastating. I saw that at TIFF. So I saw that with a press screening of maybe 300 people who had not, this was before Wes Anderson was Wes Anderson. It was a huge revelation to me, that movie. And I remember watching an entire room full of ooh, and just feeling it so powerfully. And that's not what Rushmore, I mean, it is what Rushmore is about, but it's not the A plot. And it's just devastating. I don't know that I would survive watching an entire movie of that relationship exclusively.
What about Lost in Translation?
Kind of, but that's that's sympathy again, right? Like, it's people who know they aren't together, just being friends. I think if it got sexual, it would be too weird.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of like, just as an audience member, you kind of think about it and you wonder, is something more going to happen? But I don't think the characters do. Yeah.
That's just about clinging to each other and emotionally for support, but not going to bed, like never taking it any further. And having both characters, I think, be self-possessed enough to know that it wouldn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what happens in Secret Sunshine and what happens in Islands is that we're given the possibility of happiness if the characters are brave enough to take that chance. That's where Secret Sunshine ends. Islands, I think, is leaning in that direction. And that's the best way out, because we don't have to deal with the messiness of it as an audience. And that's what anybody wants from a story. You just want to go home with a good feeling that everything's going to be okay. Yeah. It's the reassurance we don't get in life.
Yeah. And where do you, what's your favorite Lee Chang-dong film?
Ooh, maybe it's just because the impact is more recent, but I think Burning feels like a culmination. It feels like the mastery of the thing he's doing, the sense of a camera that doesn't judge and just empathizes and just follows characters through whatever their personal torments are. And poetry is really beautiful, and Secret Sunshine is ecstatic in parts, but I think Burning is the one that, and maybe it's just because it's about younger characters who aren't defined yet. Nobody has any established relationships. There's nothing that you can hang your expectations onto at the beginning, at the outset. I mean, even in Secret Sunshine, Shanae is introduced as a widow and a mother, and those come with things. Those come with elements that we have to protect or root for. And Burning is just about three strangers, really. So it's somehow more open and ambiguous. And then the more ambiguous it gets, the more interesting it becomes. And but I don't know. They're all great. Like, he's really good at what he does. I haven't seen Greenfish in about 25 years. Maybe I need to take another look at that. Or 23, however old it is. What is it, 98, 99?
I think so. Yeah.
I saw it when it played and then not since. I'd love to dig it up and see if it holds up.
Yeah. Burning didn't work for me the first time I saw it. Like, the ambiguity was a bit much for me, but when I rewatched it, I really, really loved it the second time. And I think the first time I watched it, I was at TIFF, and I don't know, sometimes watching films at TIFF works for me. Sometimes it's hard because, you're running from theater to theater and everything becomes a blur. And
the onslaught of it does make it hard to just relax into a film. Yeah.
So I find that happens a lot when I rewatch things that I saw at a festival. It's a totally different experience.
Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's the only film and if Burning is a film you see among four other movies on either side of it, that's no way to experience that movie.
Yeah. And I think it was the kind of thing where I, jammed 4 movies in a day or something like that.
Yeah. I think I would have seen it just before. It was definitely on its own day, maybe on its own evening.
Okay.
And that really worked for me. And then I watched it again in December, just before we voted at the TFC. And that sort of clarified everything. Just the beauty of the ambivalence and the way he handles class too, which doesn't really come up in Secret Sunshine, but the economic barriers that are operating throughout Burning, and the things that remove people from each other even before people are taken away.
Yeah.
That seems like something, again, it feels like a novelist's work, right? He really has a sense for someone who is so gifted with film. He's already refined his sense of building a narrative and how to interlock elements and how to weave those things together just so smoothly and beautifully. It's really been remarkable to watch him figure out his thing in real time. And the fact that he takes so much time between movies, that doesn't seem to, like, he's become, in a weird way, he's like the Korean Kubrick, in that every time he makes a movie, it's going to be a leveling up of strategy and intention, but also it'll still be good.
Yeah. And I also, for me, like, I love the stylist kind of auteur, and he's probably one of the few that I feel isn't, like he doesn't need to have the Lee Chang-dong style. Like, he doesn't have to be an auteur, but it's just such strong storytelling. Like the choices in camera work and the editing, like, it's all like very conventional, but it's almost because of that, it's so powerful.
Yeah, his aesthetic is no aesthetic.
Yeah.
It's just observational, or it feels like it is at the best of times. But then you have scenes like Burning's just beautiful, strange scene, the daybreak sequence, that gorgeous, weird removal from, I mean, it's happening, it's real, but it feels almost surreal when it does happen. And you have to wonder if you're seeing someone's dream.
Right.
And then we just go back to the mundane existence almost immediately. It's shattered, and it's so great. Just these, the same way the last shot of Secret Sunshine just stops everything. It stops your breath. There are films I've watched where I remember clenching up as the final shot is happening, hoping that it's the final shot, because if the movie blows past it, it's just going to be lesser.
Yeah.
And this was one of those. I remember seeing it in a screening room and just holding my breath to see if it was going to be the out, if this was the statement. And it was. And then you feel this rush. I love that.
Yeah.
Never happens. Or if it does, it's orchestrated with music pounding, and you just go out and you cut to black. It's the thing that Christopher Nolan does, where he orchestrates an ending that feels like you're still hurtling forwards. This is the absolute opposite. The moment where it's okay to leave.
Yeah.
The story is told. The characters will persist, but it's over for you, and that's all right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wonder when we're going to see another film from him.
Burning was 2018. We're probably due for a couple of years.
Is he still writing? Like, has he continued as an author?
I don't actually know. I don't think, if he is, I don't think it's being translated. We've sort of talked about the parallels, the thematic and emotional parallels, but is there anything specific from Secret Sunshine that you've lifted or borrowed or quoted or outright stolen for your own work?
No, not really. I think just generally, I was influenced by how humor was used in such a heavy movie, and maybe a little bit of Mr. Kim is in Joshua. I mean, very little, but no, it's a movie. Like, when I think about great screenwriting, for some reason it's always Secret Sunshine and A Separation. They're like the two movies I always think of. I mean, I know there are so many other well-written movies out there, but they're the two that have, I don't know, I guess, for whatever reason, resonated with me the most. And I think about the writing of those two movies so often.
And they're both about people on moral quests, in a way, as I'm trying to stitch them together, but they're people who are just trying to start new lives and either are or aren't punished for the decisions they make, depending on your point of view and where you place your morality. Islands is about someone whose life hasn't started yet. But he'll get there.
Yeah, he'll get there.
My thanks to Martin Edralin, whose new film Islands is screening in Toronto at TIFF Bell Lightbox tonight through Thursday. If you catch tonight's show, you'll see a Q&A with Martin, producer Priscilla Galvez, and co-star Esteban Comalang, moderated by Living Hyphen's Justine Abigail Yu. Thanks also to Jessica Schulman. She knows what she did. Martin's not on Twitter, but you can follow Islands the Movie, all one word, and you can find Secret Sunshine on Blu-ray and DVD in the Criterion Collection. It's also streaming on the Criterion Channel and available to rent or buy on most VOD platforms. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. And of course, the first year of the podcast is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's 52 episodes, 46 of which are not available to stream anywhere. Please check it out. payhip.com/Semcast. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next time.